Valentina. So we're really happy to have you here. And well, let's begin.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And so, first and foremost, I would like to thank the organizers of this very interesting seminar series for giving me the opportunity to join all of you today. Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be a part of your project and to virtually be in Mexico City today. The aim of my paper is to underline Aristotle's presence in Marsilio Ficino's treatise Platonic Theology, Theologia Platonica, in particular concerning the theme of providence. In this sense, I will shed light on how a philosopher who was traditionally believed to be a Neoplatonist and an interpreter of Renaissance Hermeticism was quite strongly influenced by Aristotle and that he even revisited him. This paper comprises two sections. The first one will reconstruct the Platonization effects Aristotle had to undergo during the 15th century, and specifically at the hand of Marsilio Ficino himself, a theme that has been overlooked by research. The second part will focus on the notion of providence, which is the main original contribution of my study. My thanks go to the important works of Craig Martin, Subverting Aristotle, Religion, History and Philosophy in Early Modern Science, and Angela Voss with her book Marsilio Ficino. In some cases, I will refer to those studies and I will cite them in some little parts. And so, I would like to share my handout with you. Just a moment. Can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
First of all, we should consider that during the 15th century, interest grew in Plato's works because they provided an alternative to the Aristotelianism that was taught in universities. Ficino led this movement, translating Plato into Latin and writing the Platonic theology, which tried to establish Plato's doctrine as a foundation for Christian theology. Moreover, regarding Platonic sensitivity in reading Aristotle during the humanistic age, we see that Marsilio Ficino was in line with both his early Aristotelian education and with authors such as Gemisius Plato. In fact, Ficino asserted the possibility of philosophical harmony between Plato and Aristotle, even though Aristotle was preparatory for the study of Platonic philosophy. In his treatise on the soul's immortality, tangency points are highlighted between their philosophies, which seem to make up a unitary doctrine. Platonis Aristotelisque Sententiam, Theologia Platonica, book 15.2. That is a sort of Prisca Philosophia. In this regard, consider also Pico della Mirandola. Aristotle is thus seen as a follower of the Hermetic tradition and of ancient mages, among whom Pythagoras and Plato. Sicut nos docent prisci theologi, Zoroaster, Mercurius, Orpheus, Aglaphemus, Pythagoras, Plato, quorum vestigia sequitur plurimum physicus, Aristoteles. Theologia Platonica, book 6.1. In this way, Aristotle's philosophy was interpreted in a Platonic manner, so that the supposed harmony with Plato became a reinterpretation of Aristotelian theories. As we can see, Ficino, who strived for philosophical and theological syncretism, is citing Themistius, who had deemed the speculation upon the mind made by Plato, Aristotle, and Theophrastus as unitary. Moreover, Ficino seems to reconstruct some sort of philosophical genealogy by highlighting the disciple relationship between Plato and Aristotle, and between the latter and Theophrastus. This is the Latin text. And more specifically, we can consider that in Book 10 of Platonic Theology, while reflecting upon the generation of individual souls, Ficino assimilates Plato's doctrine from Timaeus into that expressed by Aristotle on the generation of animals. Both admitted that when human being is generated, intellect is infused into him from the outside, according to Plato, by the artifacts of the world. Therefore, man's soul does not derive from the matter. Rather, it comes from the divine principle, which has no body. One wonders how the doctrines of Plato and that of Aristotle regarding the soul, though extremely different, ended up being associated by Ficino, sometimes even as an individual line of thought. Personally, I believe the cause lies in Ficino's criticism of Averroes' interpretation of Aristotle. According to Ficino, the Arab philosopher had commented upon Aristotle's work in an erroneous manner, in particular in regard to the soul. In this way, Averroes had conveyed an altered knowledge of Aristotle, pinpointing him as an adversary of Plato and an impious and atheist philosopher. As a matter of fact, like earlier humanists, Ficino rejected Averroes and Averroist philosophy, contending that they deviated from Christianity. Ficino maintained that Averroes contributed to accusing Aristotle of impiety, first and foremost regarding the existence of one individual intellect that is present in all individual souls. Moreover, just like Alexander of Aphrodisias, Averroes deemed that according to Aristotle, the soul was mortal. In fact, one of the effects of the desire to uncover literal or historical interpretations of Aristotle was the growth of doubts over the possibility of using Aristotle's philosophy as a foundation for theology, as Thomas Aquinas and others had done in the 13th century. The fact that Averroes and Alexander of Aphrodisias both established views that contradict Christian dogma and were considered by some to be the most accurate interpreters of Aristotle incentivized the growth of these doubts. During the so-called Plato-Aristotle controversy, Renaissance Neoplatonists, hostile toward some versions of Aristotelianism, questioned the possibility of reconciling Aristotle and Christianity, providing additional evidence for their incompatibility. See Martin. I have to consider that the Plato-Aristotle controversy admits a form of philosophical syncretism, commonly shared by humanists of the 15th century. In fact, they neither fully accepted nor fully rejected Neoplatonism or Aristotelianism, but rather assimilated some important motives of the two philosophies, sometimes considering them almost as an organic tradition of thought, the ancient tradition. This position is common within the philosophical and theological thought of the 15th century. At the same time, Renaissance authors reinterpreted this tradition in the light of Christian theology and philosophy, criticizing and rejecting some ancient themes which are incompatible with Christian doctrine. Again, as Craig Martin underlines, Marsilio Ficino agreed with the humanist common thought about language, as the cause of Averroes' failing and made the interpretation of text central to his attacks. Arguing that Averroes' errors were due to textual and linguistic issues, Ficino wrote that Aristotle's Greek words contradict Averroes because Aristotle's books had been perverted rather than converted into barbarous language. Aristotelicos libros in linguam barbaram e Greca perversus potium quam conversus, Theologia Platonica, book 15th 1. According to Ficino, Averroes' ignorance of Greek undermined his ability to interpret ancient texts and thus his authority. Consequently, Averroes himself wrongly interpreted Aristotle's books, giving their corrupt translation into Arabic. Therefore, those who came after Averroes had a very distorted image of Aristotle and saw him as an opposer to Plato. Ficino's intent was that of reinstating Aristotle's original harmony with Plato by contradicting Averroes and the Arabists' interpretation. With this motivation, Ficino wrote the book 15 of the Platonic theology in order to dismiss the heresy of Averroes and his psychology. Earlier, Ficino himself had offered the explanation that Averroes suffered from melancholy and therefore despaired about the immortality of the soul. I would like to briefly highlight the notion of melancholy as it is understood by the author. I have dealt with this issue in one of my last studies. For Marsilio Ficino, the notion of melancholy does not assume only a positive meaning, as has been highlighted by traditional historiography, Klibanski, Panofsky, and Saxl. But he, both in the Theologia Platonica and in the Vita Libri 3, also accepts the traditional view of this phenomenon, which is considered as a disease. While in the former case, the melancholic is inspired to excel in the arts and sciences, in the latter case, he or she lives in a deep state of affliction, which can cause extreme consequences, doubts about the immortality of the soul. The main problem with this position concerns the possibility to admit some form of freedom for people subjected to the determining action of Saturn and, more generally, of the stars. In particular, an important consequence of the melancholic humor emerges with Ficino, namely the lack of vital hope, such that the melancholic doubts the immortality of the soul and denies life after death. This, for the author, is the worst of the effects that the disease caused by Saturn can bring about. When Ficino refers to the positive melancholy, he admits a certain form of freedom, a freedom very different from the modern concept of self-determination and free will. Such a form of freedom coincides with abstraction from the body and with the possibility of becoming instruments of divine providential action. But when Ficino does not distinguish between the two aspects of melancholy, the positive one and the negative one, freedom is lost, and every kind of autonomous act of deliberation is denied for the subject affected by the excess of black bile. Following this first historiographical part, I will now try to examine Marsilio Ficino's idea of providence. We will see how, in this regard, Ficino's aim was still that of freeing Aristotelian thought of all accusations of atheism. That is the claim it denied divine providence and foreknowledge in the sublunar world. In this sense, too, Averroes was responsible for erroneously transmitting Aristotle's doctrine. Once again, believing Aristotle had been distant from both Christianity and Plato. Here, I will consider Ficino's position in regard to the providentialist thesis Aristotle allegedly affirmed in the On the World treatise, the Mundo. We should say that the notion of providence was extremely significant for the Christian Platonic tradition, which in some way took it from the Greek notions of eimarmene and teuke. Such an idea was traditionally considered extraneous to Aristotle, yet Ficino credited the philosopher with a providentialist theory. In this regard, let us note that in Aristotle, the debate over the faith was quite controversial, since the philosopher did not seem to be specifically interested in the topic, except in Physics, Book 2, 4, 6. Critics who shared Alexander of Aphrodisias' controversy with the determinists deemed Aristotle an indeterminist philosopher. See among others Seller and Wittmann. During the Renaissance, too, this reading of Aristotle was led by the interpretation given by the school of Padua. The doctrine of the four causes was viewed as a confrontational response to Stoic determinism. Thus, the self-determination of human intellect was seen as a foundation of its own freedom. During the late antiquity, by attesting the thought of middle Platonic philosopher Atticus, Eusebius of Caesarea, in preparations for the Gospel, Preparatio Evangelica, associated Aristotle with Epicurus, accusing both of being atheists in denial of God's providence or the divine intervention in human events. In this sense, Averroes reported Aristotle's thought that God's providence extends only to heavenly substances. Later Christian philosophers, for example Bessarion, believed that Aristotle's view was incorrect, and its impiety shows the difficulty of reconciling Aristotle with Christianity and the superiority of Plato over Aristotle. See Martin. We can consider that by following a certain late antique tradition that lasted until the Renaissance, Marsilio Ficino had interpreted the Aristotelian theme of providence in a different manner compared to Averroes. In fact, Ficino highlighted how in Nicomachean Ethics 10 and in Physics 2, it was observed that nature was always orientated toward the good goal. Such a thesis is present in the On the World treatise, where Aristotle portrays God directing the cosmos and thus governing all entities. In this regard, the image of the world as a body with its limbs is an echo of the Renaissance analogy, microcosm, microcosm. Ficino thus recounts that Aristotle openly backed the existence of providence. Nature, as a matter of fact, always has the best outcome as its goal, thus demonstrating the existence of a divine intelligence. Moreover, the Platonic theology contains three orders of reality: providence, which is concerned with intellects; fate, which concerns souls, and nature, which deals with bodies. Therefore, providence is the order of reality, or the divine law that involves the minds, human ones too. As we have seen, Ficino openly states that he took inspiration from the short treatise on the world in order to pinpoint the presence of a theory of providence in Aristotle. However, the Greek philosopher did not maintain this theory, since the said treatise is nowadays universally viewed as spurious. In fact, a general consensus places the treatise at least 2 centuries after the death of Aristotle, although it was addressed to Alexander the Great. In any case, during the Renaissance, the work was still attributed by some to Aristotle. So Ficino stated that, according to Aristotle, God moved the cosmos, and this undoubtedly proved the existence of providence. By associating Plato and Aristotle, Ficino believes that the celestial spheres are the instrumental cause of God's action. That is the reason why natural entities are in motion. In Book 10 of Platonic Theology, it is stated that all of nature's works are carried out by a divine intelligence that makes the skies revolve as if they were its own instruments. Therefore, God acts through celestial motions, which are in turn the means through which forms are transmitted or predisposed. Ficino thus states that forms begin in God's mind, then progress to the skies, and ultimately into matter, which in itself reproduces divine intelligence. In the same way, in art, the form of the artifact is first shaped in the artist's mind, then in the tools used, and ultimately into the matter that is molded. Book 2 of Platonic Theology is titled Deus Amat and Providet. In this section, Ficino's arguments on providence are detailed and often involve Aristotle, as we have just seen in the text above. The themes that are presented in Book 2 are of a cosmological, physical, philosophical, and theological nature, and just like Aristotle, Ficino affirms the finalism of the cosmos and God's constant action within it. In a cosmological sense, Ficino believes that the celestial spheres, as they continuously move away from their present state, are not stable in and of themselves. Therefore, the aim that gives them motion must be external from them. Just as the order in the ranks of an army depends upon one commander, in the same way the world's order is in God, the one and only principle of the cosmos. So the cosmic parts proceed toward a determined goal and realize their proper deeds in the best possible manner. Since the bodies themselves are unaware of their motion, they are unable to determine an aim they should pursue. Their goal must then necessarily be given to them by another being, which guides nature with wisdom. Ficino thus speaks about the archer who, with expertise, directs the arrow, just as God providentially accompanies natural events. One must note that Ficino's arguments move from the universal, the skies, to the individual, each entity. Above all, he poses a need for consequence between the lunar and sublunar worlds, both of which obey the same physical and logical laws. God looks after natural things in respect to their natural goodness, and the rational things in respect to their voluntary, that is to say, moral goodness. At the level of natural things, the order or providence is twofold. Firstly, in those things which have no defects, that is, in the heavens. Secondly, in those things which may and do have defects, that is, the sublunar world. Nevertheless, that which often is defective in order by God into something good, as in the dissolution of one thing to form the composition of another thing, or the misfortune of one or a few becoming the advantage of many. Now, in the rational order of heaven, there is no defect, whereas under the heavens there exists, in rational beings, the tendency to defect the will. But this does not derive from the rational part of their nature. In these beings, the defect is brought back to the order of the good by God, that is, either into the order of justice through punishment, or into the order of compassion through forgiveness. It is the Latin text. According to Marsilio Ficino, because things always proceed in the same order, it is not by chance that there is some other determined cause outside matter and above the natural principle of agency, by whose intention individual things lead to the most perfect end. In a kingdom ruled by a king of infinite power and wisdom, nothing can be good without his providence. Likewise, the stable order of completely mutable things and the union of completely different things do not proceed from the things themselves, but from a higher stability and unity. As attested by Angela Fosso, Aristotle in Metaphysics 11 attested that the order of the world derives from its first cause, just as the order of the army derives from the leader. And the order of the army is twofold. Firstly, in the relation of the parts to the whole. Secondly, in the relation of the parts to the leader. And the order of the parts related to the whole through the ordering of the whole to the leader. Unless the thing is so, the other cannot be. In conclusion, I have tried to underline the specific meaning, the notion of providence acquired in Marsilio Ficino. Though in complaints with the Neoplatonist and the Hermetic tradition, he accepted a thesis that during the Renaissance was believed to be Aristotelian. In this way, he enforced his own argument with a universal philosophical concordance, giving ample space to Aristotle's reinterpretation in a Platonic manner. All of this contributed to underlining the important influence Aristotle had on Ficino, still leaving enough room for future developments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Valentina, for your wonderful talk. I was wondering if you can share your PowerPoint with us.
Yes, of course.
Just to have the reference.
Just a moment.
Thank you.
Which slide do you want?
Oh no, I meant the file, your file in
Oh,
the
yes,
chat.
of course. Just a moment.
Thank you.
How can I do?
Or maybe you can send it to me later and I will.
Okay. There is the chat, but I don't know if I can share it using
I,
the chat.
I think you can. Let me see. There's a little picture, like a square that says file.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Just a moment.
Thank you.
Okay. Teresa, I can send it to you just now by email. Okay.
Thank you so much. Sorry.
So sorry, but I'm not able.
Thank you. Sorry.
Done.
Thanks. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, we have some time for Q&A. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand. Ricardo?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for your talk. So interesting, so stimulating. I have a couple of questions. One has to do with well, it's a very basic question. It has to do with the authenticity of the Mundo. No, from what I saw, no, I noticed that Ficino regards the Mundo as authentic, no, as a genuine Aristotelian work, and well, it was and still is by some people considered a genuine work, but there is at least a discussion nowadays about whether it is or it isn't genuine, and so I was wondering whether Ficino was just assuming that it is an Aristotelian work just because it is in the corpus. And I mean, he's not discussing the issue of whether it is or it isn't. That's one option. Or the other option is that he did take part in some discussion about whether the work was genuine or not, and he finally concluded that it is genuine. So what I wanted to ask you is which of these two options is correct? I mean, I'm not well, I'm really don't know about the issue, but I would say that perhaps in the Renaissance, everything that was in the corpus was regarded by as genuine, no, or I don't know. So that's my sorry, that's my first question. And the second question, should I ask it now, Teresa, or after?
Yes, no, if you want to, it's fine.
Okay, and my second question is this. It has to do with melancholy, no? You pointed out that for Ficino, melancholy is something that has to do with the influence of Saturn, no, the planet. And of course that's a very widespread view, no? But how does Ficino explain, if he does explain that, how does he explain that that Saturn has an influence in some people and in some it hasn't, or why is it that in some people the influence of Saturn is greater than in others? Does that have to do with the chemical composition of the person, where I mean which has or has more a black bile or I mean, what's the role of black bile and of Saturn? I mean, how these two factors interact with one another in melancholy. So that's what I wanted to know, if I may.
Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you very much for your questions. Very interesting questions. Okay, the first one about the Mundo. I don't have an answer for you, because Ficino says the Mundo is an original, is a text by Aristotle, and so it looks as Ficino is not involved in the debate about the possibility of that the Mundo is an original Aristotelian text or isn't. So, according to Ficino, Aristotle wrote the Mundo. Of course, during the 15th century, there was a debate about this problem, about this theme. I think that, according to Ficino, the Mundo was an Aristotelian treatise because it was in the Corpus Aristotelicum, and in Ficino's library, the Mundo was a part of the Aristotelian corpus and was an Aristotelian treatise. And so, according to the material proofs of the question, I can say that, according to Ficino, Aristotle wrote the Mundo, and it is an important treatise of the Aristotelian works. Of course, it's a little bit strange also for me, because Ficino was the one of the most important leaders in the Renaissance debate. And so how was it possible that he was not a part of this community, a part of the debate about the Mundo? I think that it is just an historiographical question. And so the Mundo was a part of the library of Ficino and was an Aristotelian treatise of the library of Ficino. I think so.
Just one question. So there was a debate about whether the Mundo was or wasn't an Renaissance, and the point is that Ficino didn't take part in this debate. Is that what you said, or that there was no debate at all about the authenticity?
Okay, maybe that a debate is something more than what happened at the time, but there were authors that considered the Mundo a spurious Aristotelian text. And so I can say this. But Ficino was not one of these authors. And so he was a traditional Aristotelian philosopher in this sense. But there were many views about the problem of the Mundo. Secondly, about the melancholy, your question is a question related to Ficino, but is a very general question, because the problem of the melancholy was a general problem during the Renaissance. And so why does Saturn influence this person and not also that person? There are many points on this regard. Firstly, women were more open to receive the influence by Saturn. And so during the Renaissance, many learned women were considered melancholic because of Saturn, because of the stars in general, but in particular because of the influence by Saturn. But the most important detail was the conjunction of stars at the moment of the birth of a person. And so the moment, the day, but in particular the moment of the birth was predisposed by the astrological sky, and some people were very open to the influence of the stars, and some other peoples were not. And Ficino is very close to this traditional interpretation of melancholy.
Right.
That his position is original because he distinguished
Right.
two kinds of melancholies, but in this sense is a very traditional author.
Right, I see. But why were some people more susceptible to the action of the stars? I mean, does he have an explanation of that? I mean, so women are more sensitive to the influence of Saturn, but is that because of, I mean, does that have a cause, or is it just a matter of, I don't know, of coincidence? Well, not coincidence, but some kind of, I mean, is there an explanation that has to do with the chemical composition of women as opposed to men, or something like that, or not really?
Yes, in this sense, I can say that Ficino and other Renaissance authors were Aristotelian, because the composition of women is a predisposition to accept the influence of stars, and so by Saturn. Of course, not every woman was a melancholic woman. Why? Learned women were more open to Saturn, and their sensibility was very close to the black bile. But the moment of the birth is the most important detail about this problem and this influence.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Edgar?
Yes, thanks a lot, Valentina, for this very interesting talk. I just have a couple of questions. One is, I mean, as you explained, I mean, two of the most important objections of Ficino against Averroes is that one is that, I mean, he didn't was based on language, right? He didn't know Greek. He wasn't reading he didn't read properly the text. So that's, let's say, one objection. And the other was not linguistic, but was like psychological, right? I mean, he was affected by this psychological condition that influenced his interpretation of Aristotle. So I just wanted to ask if there was like a one of these was more important for Ficino. I mean, because if he was anyway affected by melancholy, even if he had his Greek had been better. I mean, he had been able to reading Greek. I mean, probably he was just psychologically determined to this kind of skeptical view of Aristotle, right? So I don't know if there is like any let's say predominance of one of these reasons over the other, or it just was he didn't read properly, and that's like the most important explanation of.
Okay, yes, thank you, Edgar. In the Platonic theology, we can see that according to Ficino, the most important problem of Averroes was his a linguistic problem. He didn't know the Greek language, and so this was the worst position with regard to Aristotle, with regard to the ancient world in general. And so, according to Ficino, Aristotle was, Averroes was a bad person. He said a bad person because he tried to translate Aristotle even though he didn't know Greek. And so Aristotle was perverted rather than converted because of this lack in Averroes' work. But we know that Aristotelian works had a very complex way, and so which Aristotelian text could Averroes read and translate. It is a big historiographical problem, but according to Ficino, the reason why Averroes was very distant from the original Aristotle was a linguistic problem. And so the Greek language was the key to really understand Aristotle.
Okay. Okay, thanks a lot. And my other question had to do with something that you mentioned now, that I mean, and also in relation to the Mundo, right? Because I mean, in your exposition, you it was important that you say, well, that Ficino based some of his judgments on the Mundo, but the Mundo seems to be an spurious Aristotelian pseudo-Aristotelian treatise. But I was wondering whether Averroes knew the Mundo, whether he read it or not, because it was translated into Arabic, right? I think I don't know if at Averroes' time, but certainly it was translated into Arabic. So I don't know if he read that book and whether did it have any influence on, I mean, whether Ficino has a view on that, or, I mean, because if he didn't know the book that seemed to be important for Ficino's interpretation, it was also not just a matter of not being able to read Greek, but also of not knowing the right works. I mean, that he didn't know all the relevant works to form a good opinion on a well-founded opinion on the matter.
Oh, of course, it is a big historiographical problem, because what was the Mundo for Renaissance philosophers? Ficino knew the Mundo, of course, and Ficino read the commentaries to Aristotelian books, and so he had in his library the commentaries, the medieval commentaries on Aristotle. And so this providentialist thesis attributed to Aristotle was also a thesis transmitted by medieval authors. And so it is a big question, because he read the Mundo, but in some parts, and these parts were transmitted and reported during the centuries. But of course, he knew the medieval commentaries, and this providentialist thesis was a Christian thesis, attributed to Aristotle. And so we can see two sides of the problem: the Christian inspiration of the problem, and so the will to give to Aristotle a Christian shape, and also the transmission of the original text. And this transmission was a very accidental transmission.
Okay, thanks a lot, Valentina.
Thank you.
Thank you, Edgar and Valentina. Any other questions? Yes, Luzma?
Hi. I will ask you if you consider that the melancholic character is a condition warranted by the providencia, or is it something that, yes, is it something that we can attribute to the providencia, or because Ficino is saying that Averroes is a bad for wanting to translate Aristotle without knowing, but he's doing so because he is melancholic. But that in final instance, that is because he is melancholic. Isn't it like a design from the same providencia? That's the first question. And the second question is, if some people are affected in a positive way by the black bile, and some people are affected in a negative way by the black bile, why is determined that? And what can a person who is affected in a negative way by black bile can do to contrast it? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions. Okay. Of course, melancholy was a way to be in contact with God, and so melancholy was an instrument of providential acts. It is a traditional thesis, because I tried to underline that according to Ficino, melancholy is also something negative, but melancholy as a positive thing was already attested by Klibaski, Sachs, and so on. So we know that according to Ficino, the melancholic state is a way to be in contact with God, and so a way to be an instrument of God's will. And so, of course, melancholic can be an instrument of providence. The second point, why can somebody be affected by melancholy in a positive way, and why somebody for somebody is the contrary? We can't distinguish these two positions in a subject. According to Ficino, the melancholic is a person who is in contact with God, but we cannot say if it is a positive condition or if it is a negative condition. It is a positive state if we are in this moment an instrument of God, but it is a negative condition if we are sick, if we are subjected to the melancholic humor in a bad way. And so the same person is at the same time subjected to the positive melancholy and to the negative melancholy. And so the black bile is something not good, but it's something good if we are instrument of God's providence. And so according to Ficino, there are two sides of the same problem. And the problem is melancholy, but it is something good and it is something not good in the same people in the same time.
Okay, thank you. I have a question. So I was wondering if you have found any other influence of the Mundo in Ficino's works.
Teresa, I can't hear you. If there are
more influences of the Mundo in Ficino and Ficino's other treatises.
Okay, thank you. We can find some passages attributed to the Mundo in the Platonic theology, and in some cases, Ficino wrote as Aristotle said in the treatise De Mundo, and it is clear that Ficino is referring to this treatise, this Aristotelian, according to Ficino, Aristotelian treatise. I can say that also in the Vita there are not direct passages by the De Mundo, but there is an influence by the De Mundo, because in the De Vita, Ficino wrote about the possibility to be in contact with God, and the problem of providence is close to this question. So I can't say that I found some direct passages by the De Mundo in the De Vita, but I think that the influence of this Aristotelian treatise is important also in this case.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And I was thinking about the relationship between Plato and Aristotle in Ficino's thought, because we kind of think of Ficino as this like super Platonist.
Yeah.
But he also kind of considered, as you show, Aristotle as a very important figure in the history of philosophy. So I was wondering if you think he considered Aristotle as a Platonist, or like a member of the same school, or not?
Yes, there is a. It is not strange to see that humanists consider Plato and Aristotle in the same line of thought. And so the Renaissance syncretism, philosophical and theological syncretism, considers these two authors as the main figures of the most important tradition, that is the ancient tradition. But of course, Ficino was a super Platonic, yes, and he tried to Platonize Aristotle. He considered Aristotle the best pupil of Plato, and so in this sense, the most important Platonic philosopher. And he tried to stress the tangency points between Plato and Aristotle. But I think that the main goal of Ficino would be not just consider Aristotle a Platonic philosopher, but consider Aristotle a Christian philosopher, because he wrote the Platonic theology, and so according to Ficino, Platonism was the Christian philosophy, and was also the Christian theology in some cases. And in this sense, he tried to consider Aristotle also a Christian author, a pre-Christian, but an author very close to Christian message. And at the time, there were some problems. The problem of the providence, the problem of the immortality of the soul, we know, and the problem of the unmoved mover, very far from the real world. And so Ficino entered the Plato-Aristotle controversy, and as a Platonic philosopher tried to Platonize Aristotle and to consider Aristotle an author close to Christian philosophy and theology. But in any case, Plato was the main philosopher, of course.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know, more questions? I don't see any. So if we don't have any more questions, then well, I thank you, Valentina, for this wonderful talk, for the Q&A session, and well, thank everyone for attending the SIFAR, and we'll see each other next week, I think, right? Okay.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Valentina, again.
Thank you very much for being here and for inviting me, for being here, and thank you for your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
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 Ciao.